Mesquite Crossing wasn't the kind of place you found on any proper map. It was a smear of dust and desperation clinging to the edge of the Chihuahuan Desert, where jackrabbits outnumbered people and nothing green had grown in 3 summers. Folks said the wind there didn't blow, it hissed. At the dead end of Main Street, leaning like a drunk against time itself, sat the Hollow Boot Saloon. Half its roof was tin, the other half sky. Its windows were fogged with the breath of regret, and the whiskey behind the bar tasted like turpentine kissed by fire. That night, Ephraim Weller stepped through the swinging doors like a ghost who hadn't yet decided if he wanted to stay dead. He was tall, but the kind of tall that stooped from carrying things too long. His duster coat was sun-bleached, his boots stitched with the memory of long roads, and his 6-shooter, an old Colt .44, rode silent on his right hip, like it had stories too painful to tell. Weller didn't come to town often, and when he did, folks left him be. He was a cattleman out of Bitterroot Mesa, living alone with more land than he needed and fewer reasons to smile than fingers on one hand. They said he used to be a bushwhacker in the border wars, back when Missouri bled and Kansas burned. They said a lot of things. None of them mattered to Weller. What mattered was the card game in the back room. It was a Friday night, and the poker table behind the saloon's curtain flickered under oil lamps. 5 players circled the table, their eyes hollowed from cheap liquor and cheaper lives. Among them was Rufus Red-Eye Dandridge, a twitchy gambler with fingers like piano hammers and a mouth that never knew when to stay shut. Rufus was losing bad. Sweat pooled beneath his collar, and his last silver dollar sang its sad little song as it hit the pot. He looked around like a man out of chips and out of prayers. Then, with a drunken kind of bravado, he motioned toward the corner. "I got one more steak," he slurred. "A rare piece, alive and breathin'." Heads turned. In the dark sat a figure, slumped and motionless, covered from head to toe in a burlap sack, bound at the wrists with rawhide. No movement, no sound. Just the suggestion of a woman beneath. "What in hell is that?" one player muttered. "My collateral," Rufus said. "She's from down past San Piedad. Real fine. Quiet, too. Worth more in this whole damn town." A hush fell. Ephraim Weller stared, not blinking, not breathing. His hand moved slowly to his coat pocket, pulled out 15 silver dollars and laid them on the table. Then came the Colt .44. "I'll play," he said. The others backed off. The cards were dealt. Rufus had a pair of 8s. Weller laid down a flush. Hearts. No cheers. No groans. Just silence like a coyote howl caught in its throat. Rufus sank back. "She's yours," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "God help you." Weller stood. He walked to the woman, crouched beside her. He didn't speak right away, just reached out and gently tugged the sack loose. A face appeared beneath, dirty, bruised, but alive. Her eyes were black as night, wide open, and colder than a January wind. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. He looked at her, saw something break in those eyes, not fear something older, something hollowed out long ago. He took off his duster and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Come on," he said, not unkindly. "You're leaving with me." He turned to the saloon keeper. "If anyone asks, tell him she's my wife." Then he helped her to her feet, and together they stepped out into the high desert night. where the stars were sharp as knives and the wind carried the scent of old gunpowder and older sins. The ride out to Two Mule Hollow was long and quiet. Ephraim didn't ask questions, and the woman didn't volunteer answers. She rode behind him on his bay gelding, her hands clutching the saddle horn like it was the last solid thing on earth. The wind whipped dry and sharp across the mesa, carrying with it the scent of creosote and ancient bones. By the time they crested the ridge above his ranch, the sun had dipped low, bleeding red into the jagged silhouette of the Whippoorwill Gulch. Ephraim's homestead sat small and weather-beaten, nestled between two cracked boulders shaped like mules mid-step. How the place got its name. One corral, half a barn, 2 cows, and silence thicker than molasses in January. He helped her off the horse without a word. She was lighter than expected, but held herself like someone who'd fought for every step she'd ever taken. He handed her a canteen, which she drank from greedily, water running down her chin and neck. Her hands trembled, but her eyes never left his. He opened the cabin door and gestured her inside. "Ain't much, but it's dry," he muttered. "Got beans, if you're hungry. Stove's temperamental, but she'll hold." She stepped inside and looked around. The place was sparse wooden cot, table, potbelly stove, and a wall covered in old cavalry maps and dried flowers that had long since lost their color. Ephraim struck a match, lit a lantern, and the shadows jumped. She finally reached up and pulled the burlap sack off her head. Her hair was black, tangled, and matted with days of dust. There were bruises along her neck, the kind that come from rope and rage. One cheekbone was cut, half-healed and jagged, but it was her eyes, black as coal and just as unyielding, that stopped Ephraim cold. He saw something in them, not beauty, not fear, but defiance, like a wolf cornered too many times to care if it dies. "What's your name?" he asked, not expecting an answer. "Marigold," she said softly, but it came out like gravel under boot heel. "Marigold what vein?" He blinked. The name meant nothing, but the way she said it, like it had once belonged to someone with pride and now tasted like rust, he didn't push further. She didn't speak again that night, just sat by the stove, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring into nothing like it owed her an apology. Ephraim cooked beans with salt pork, slid a plate across the table. She ate slow, deliberate, like every bite might be poisoned. But she didn't stop. He watched her hands scarred, calloused, the knuckles split from fights or frostbite, maybe both. She held the spoon like a weapon, wrist loose, but ready. A woman who'd known chains, or worse. Ephraim didn't ask. He knew what silence meant out here. In the West, folks didn't tell stories unless they were ready to let the past bury itself. He sat across from her, drinking black coffee gone cold. It was the closest he'd been to another soul in months, maybe years. There was something else, too. Something that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise, not fear, but memory. Her stare reminded him of Lenora, his baby sister, dead now these 15 years, hung by vigilantes who mistook her for a Comanche lover during the border wars. She'd had the same hard edge in her eyes, like steel wrapped in silk. He looked away. Outside, the wind kicked up dust, thudding against the windows like a warning. Coyotes howled somewhere near the ridge, the kind of sound that made you load your rifle and check your boots before bed. You can take the cot, he said. I'll sleep in the barn. Marigold didn't argue. She just nodded, once sharp, businesslike. But as he grabbed his coat and headed for the door, she spoke again. Why'd you take me? He paused, hand on the knob. Didn't sit right, he said after a moment. A person ain't meant to be wagered like a whiskey bottle. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. They were strangers. Survivors. Two broken things trying not to shatter in the same room. As he stepped out into the cold night, stars bright and cruel overhead, he realized something strange. He wasn't sure if he'd saved her, or if she'd just walked into his life to save what little was left of him. The first scream came 3 nights later. Ephraim shot up from his bedroll in the barn, heart pounding like a sledgehammer in his chest. It was close inside the cabin. He grabbed his rifle, boots barely on, and burst through the door with the barrel raised. Marigold was thrashing on the cot, sweat shining on her face, mouth whispering words that weren't English. Non. Arrêtez, je vous en prie. Madre de Dios. French and Spanish tangled like roots in a flood. He didn't move toward her, just watched. Eventually, she went still, shoulders heaving, eyes wide open, but lost somewhere far from Two Mule Hollow. Ephraim set the rifle down and poured water into a tin cup. Here, he said softly. Offering it out, she took it without looking at him, fingers trembling, sipped once, twice, then set it down, her gaze focused on the stove's dying embers. I saw bayou trees, she whispered, voice dry as sand, and snakes in the water. Ephraim didn't ask. But he sat beside the table and waited. After a long pause, she spoke again, slow and halting, like dragging stone across gravel. I was born Marigold Vane, daughter of Baptiste Vane, lord of sugarcane fields in Bayou Noir, Louisiana. He was French Creole. My mother was a quadroon nursemaid, his kept woman. I was born neither slave nor free, just something. Inconvenient. Her jaw tightened. The words came sharper now, like a knife cutting old rope. When the war ended and the Union came, the old world died. My father was killed. The house burned. A man Calderon bought me off a smuggler for 2 gold coins and a saddlebag of bourbon. He said I was his exotic pet. She didn't cry. Her voice stayed cold and clear. I stabbed the first guard who tried to lay hands on me. Got 30 lashes for it. I escaped once. Made it as far as San Angelo before they dragged me back in chains. I bit off a man's finger in Corpus Christi. Still have the scar on my cheek. She turned her face toward the lantern light, revealing the faded pink line like a whisper of flame from jaw to ear. Ephraim said nothing, just clenched his jaw and stared into the shadows. She reached up and tugged at the collar of her shirt, revealing a faded tattoo near her shoulder blade, a snake coiled around a rose, inked in deep green and black. La mano seca, she said. They brand their property. A mark of ownership. Ephraim knew the name. Everyone in the borderlands had heard whispers of them. The dry hand, traffickers, slavers, smugglers of flesh and secrets, with tendrils reaching from Monterey to New Orleans. Their leader was said to be a ghost, a devil, a myth. But Ephraim now knew he had a name. Don Esteban Calderon. She confirmed. reading his silence. He's real, rich, protected, kills anyone who talks. Ephraim looked down at the calluses on his own palms. He'd fought in brutal skirmishes, bled for men who later called him expendable, and buried his sister beneath a crooked cedar tree after she was lynched by cowards in uniform. He knew the scent of rot, the taste of injustice. "You got away from him," he said finally. "I thought I had." Marigold stood, walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned like old lanterns. "He'll come. He always does." Ephraim followed her gaze. The land stretched quiet and unforgiving. A man could hide out here for years and still be found by the wrong set of boots. "You ain't property," he said quietly. "No," she replied, turning to face him. "I'm a ghost with a knife behind her teeth." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was something else acknowledgement. Two people who'd been forged in fire and hadn't quite come out human on the other side. She crossed the room, sat down again. "I didn't mean to drag you into this." Ephraim shook his head. "You didn't. But you will be." He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, he didn't see a victim. He saw something wilder, something dangerous, and he realized that this wasn't a woman to protect. This was a woman to ride beside. Spring came slow and stubborn to Two Mule Hollow. The wind still cut like a broken promise, and the nights dipped below freezing well into April. But the earth, against all odds, softened, just enough to let things grow. Marigold took to ranch work like someone who'd done harder things before. She didn't complain, didn't ask questions, just rolled up her sleeves and got to mending the south fence. Hammering new nails into old cedar posts Ephraim had nearly given up on. She moved with the patience of someone who understood animals better than people. She talked to the cows under her breath, cooed to the pregnant heifer when the birth went sideways, and elbow deep in blood and mud. She saved both calf and mother with the cool focus of a field medic. Ephraim stood nearby, stunned silent, holding nothing but a towel and a look of useless awe. "Don't just gawk," she'd muttered, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. "Get the iodine." Later that same week, a Mustang they'd penned for shoeing broke through the gate, kicking wild in a rage of muscle and fear. Ephraim caught the brunt of a flying hoof across the ribs, dropping like a sack of grain. Marigold didn't scream. She moved. She grabbed a length of rope, dodged a second kick, and looped the lariat like a seasoned cowhand. 2 swift turns and a hard yank, and the horse went down in a twist of dust and fury. When she rushed to Ephraim's side, blood already staining his shirt, she barely hesitated. "You still breathing, just enough to curse you with." He wheezed. She snorted and hauled him up, half dragged him to the porch like he weighed nothing. He didn't remember passing out, but he woke with her hand pressed against his ribs, muttering something in French that sounded half like prayer and half like threat. After that, something shifted. They began having coffee together every morning, 2 chipped enamel mugs steaming in the pre-dawn quiet. Marigold didn't like sugar. Ephraim drank his black. Neither talked much, but they sat side by side on the porch steps, staring across the scrubland toward Juniper Hills, watching the sky blaze orange and gold like it was apologizing for yesterday. One evening, as the sun slid low and the coyotes started yipping out near the gulch, Ephraim broke the silence. "You remind me of someone," he said. Marigold didn't look at him. She just sipped her coffee, waiting. "My sister, Lenora." He hadn't said her name out loud in years. It hung in the air like smoke. She was 19, smart, wild-hearted. She used to wear a red scarf around her head and ride bareback like she was born for it. Folks in town didn't like her, said she talked to ravens, said she read fortunes. He stopped, swallowed hard. One night, after some kids went missing during a flood, they came for her, called her witch, hung her from the old cottonwood outside the church. Marigold finally looked over. Her expression didn't change, but her hand, the one holding the mug, gripped just a little tighter. "No one stopped them," Ephraim said. "Not even me. I was away, fightin' some skirmish down near Osage territory. Came home to a shallow grave and a broken mother." He looked down. "That's why I don't believe in justice." Marigold nodded once. Justice is just vengeance with a Bible verse tacked on. For a long time, they just sat. Wind rustled through the dry mesquite. The stars began to blink into existence one by one, careless and cold. "You could leave," he said finally. "Head east or south. I won't stop you." "I could," she replied, "but I'm not ready to be afraid again." He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased, just a bit. From that night on, the silence between them changed shape. It wasn't cold anymore. It was something warm, slow-burning, like coals buried beneath the ash. They weren't lovers. Not yet. But they weren't strangers either. They were two people with too many ghosts between them, learning to breathe in the same room without waking the dead. And for now, in that dusty corner of nowhere, it was enough. The first warning came as smoke, black tendrils rising over the southern ridge, drifting slow and cruel across the sky like vultures in no hurry. Ephraim and Marigold were branding calves when they saw it, and neither needed to speak. They knew. Trouble had found them. By nightfall, word reached to Mule Hollow. An old trader limped his mule into the ranch yard, half-starved and scared out of his wits. His voice shook as he spoke. They came through El Tenedor, burned 3 homes, took a woman and a boy, left the old folks in the well. Marigold's jaw locked. Ephraim clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "Who?" Ephraim asked. The trader licked dry lips. "Said they rode from San Piedad. Rode under a red sash and a black snake." Marigold stepped back like she'd been shot. "La mano seca," she muttered. "He's here. He, Don Esteban Calderon." But Calderon wasn't the one who did the dirty work. He had wolves for that. The worst of them, the one sent to finish what others couldn't, was a butcher named Cruz El Martillo, the Hammer. A man who carried no gun, just a war axe and a chain belt heavy with jawbones, each one real. They said he once cracked a man's ribs with one swing and made the widow clean the floor with her dress. 2 nights later, Ephraim found a dead steer gutted on his north fence, the hide flayed, carved with a crude snake symbol. A warning, or a promise. They wanted Marigold. But more than that, they wanted to silence her. because Marigold Vane wasn't just a runaway. She was the loose end that could unravel a human trafficking ring stretching from Matamoros to Baton Rouge. Calderon trafficked in bodies, and Marigold had seen the ledger names, prices, dates, clients. If she ever made it to a federal judge, the empire would fall. "They don't just want to drag me back," she said, voice flat. "They want to erase me." Ephraim stood silent for a long time on the porch, staring into the dusk. Then he turned, walked inside, and pulled a battered leather pouch from under a floorboard. Inside was a map, a .56 Spencer rifle, and a single name written on yellowed paper, Lafayette Lanky Briggs. Back in the day, Briggs had been sheriff of a mining town called Sorrow Ridge. He cleaned it up with nothing but a scattergun and a copy of the good book. Then the railroad came through, and politicians ousted him for being too uncivilized. So he took up selling bullets to both sides in the Mexican conflict, just as long as they paid in gold. "Briggs owes me," Ephraim said, "and if I know him, he'll want another swing at something that bleeds." He sent a rider that night, young Jeb Thorne, from a ranch over yonder, paid him $10 silver and a flask of bourbon to ride fast and not look back. Then they waited. 3 days passed. The land grew still. Marigold packed the rifles herself, cleaned the pistol, sharpened the Bowie knives. She strung wire along the fence lines, hid dynamite in feed sacks, and turned the root cellar into a last-stand bunker. She didn't speak much, but her eyes told the story, calm, focused, ready. Ephraim boarded up the windows, reinforced the barn doors, and buried a stash of ammo in 5-gallon flour tins. He didn't sleep more than 2 hours at a stretch. Each night, they heard coyotes howling closer. On the 4th night, they spotted torchlight moving across the valley. 7 riders, one of them larger than the rest. No rifle, just an axe slung across his back. "El Martillo," Marigold whispered. Her voice was flat, as steel drawn from a sheath. They didn't attack that night, just circled the perimeter, like dogs testing a fence. Left behind another message this time, nailed to the front gate with a hunting knife. "Come out, or we burn it all." Ephraim read it, then set it on fire. "They're not getting you," he said simply. Marigold didn't answer. But when he looked over, she was smiling, not soft, not sweet, but like a woman who'd bled before and didn't mind doing it again. Just before dawn on the 5th day, hoofbeats thundered in the distance. Not from the south, but the west. A single rider galloped in, long limbs flailing like a scarecrow in a storm. Lanky Briggs, now older, grayer, with a whiskey gut and 2 pearl-handled Colts strapped crosswise like a lunatic preacher. "Hell of a welcome party," he hollered as he dismounted. "Heard you were throwing a funeral for bastards. Thought I'd bring candles." Marigold handed him a coffee without a word. Briggs took a sip, grimaced. "Still tastes like dirt," he muttered. "Guess we're going to get along just fine." Ephraim smiled for the first time in days. The storm had arrived, but so had the fire. By the 6th day, Two Mule Hollow looked less like a ranch and more like a frontier fort. Ephraim, Marigold, Lanky Briggs, and 4 neighboring ranchers, Jeb Thorne, Old Maynard, the Brown brothers, and Ellie Bell had turned the property into a kill zone. They strung barbed wire across cattle runs, dug foxholes around the chicken coop, and packed dynamite into hollowed fence posts. Marigold laid tripwires, like she'd done it before, which she had, down in Louisiana swamps, evading bounty hunters. Lanky supervised the makeshift minefield with a bottle of whiskey in one hand and a detonator in the other. "We ain't building a castle," he grinned. "We're digging a graveyard." Ephraim loaded shells by candlelight. His fingers were cracked and bleeding, but his eyes held something hard. Purpose. A man with nothing left to lose, fights like hell to keep what little he's found. That night, the wind changed, came from the south, brought with it the scent of horses, sweat, and blood. At 2 a.m. the silence snapped. 12 riders came hard across the ridge, shadows with torches, rifles, machetes. Cruz El Martillo led the charge, his war axe glinting in the firelight, shirtless and painted in crimson, jawbone belt swinging like a butcher's prize. The first explosion lit the night like Judgment Day. A horse tripped a mine, then 2 more. Screams. Shrapnel. Fire. Ephraim fired from the roof of the barn, dropping a rider clean off his saddle. Marigold was in the loft with her father's sharps, 1874 picking targets, like death herself, calm, slow, precise, 1 shot, 1 fall. Lanky fired both Colts at once, screaming scripture as bullets flew, "And the Lord shall smite the wicked from their saddles." Ellie Bell, barely 5 feet tall, lobbed lanterns of kerosene like grenades, setting the west field ablaze. The Brown boys worked the crank, Gatling, sweeping the fence line with thunder. For a moment, it felt like they might win. Then Cruz reached the gate. He kicked it down like a devil on holiday. 2 men followed him, machetes out, teeth bared. Cruz roared, "Bring me the girl," but Marigold was already moving. She leapt from the loft, rolled, and came up behind the pig shed, rifle steady. The sharps barked once, missed. Cruz turned, eyes wild, charged. Second shot center chest. He stumbled. Third shot through the eye. He dropped like a felled bull, axe still in hand, teeth gritted in death. The others hesitated. They looked at their fallen leader, looked at the fire, the smoke, the blood, and knew this wasn't a hunt. It was a reckoning. They scattered, disappearing into the dawn like rats from a sinking ship. But victory had teeth. A bullet had found Ephraim buried deep in his side. He collapsed near the barn, blood soaking his shirt, breath shallow. Marigold ran to him, dropping the rifle. Her hands pressed against the wound, voice cracking. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Damn it, Ephraim, don't you leave me now." For the first time since she'd stepped into his life, her eyes weren't hard. They were wet, shining. "You look awful," Ephraim muttered, and coughed blood. She laughed, choked, wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "You too, cowboy." Lanky appeared with bandages and whiskey, cursing like a preacher in hell. "Don't you die," he growled. "I just restocked my powder from you, you stubborn son of a mule." The sun rose behind the burning field. Ash drifted through the air like black snow. Half the ranch was gone, but the silence that followed wasn't hollow. It was earned. They'd made a stand, and the vultures had choked on bone. 3 weeks passed. The fires went out, but the scars remained. Ephraim healed slow, as old men do. He bore the pain without complaint, though every movement pulled at the stitches like barbed wire under skin. Marigold stayed close, patching wounds with quiet hands, boiling herbs she refused to name, and sitting beside him long after sleep should have come. Then one morning, a rider came up the hollow, lean, sharp-eyed, coat dusty with a bounty hunter's arrogance. He carried a wanted poster in one hand and a Springfield rifle in the other. "I'm looking for a woman goes by Marigold Vane," he drawled. "Wanted for murder in Orleans Parish. Slit a man's throat and set his house on fire." Marigold stepped onto the porch, unflinching. "I slit his throat, yes," she said, "but I was 12. He bought me when I was 10. The hunter raised an eyebrow, but his voice stayed flat. "There's a price. $1,000, dead or alive." Or Ephraim shifted forward, pain etched deep across his brow. "Try it," he growled. "See how far you get." But it didn't come to gunplay. Not yet. Because Lanky Briggs, as it turned out, knew people. The right kind of people. People who kept ledgers and remembered names. And so Ephraim wrote a letter. It was long, precise, and laced with fury. It named names, dates, places. Attached to it was a copy of a small black notebook, Marigold's father's ledger, which she'd stolen before escaping Don Esteban. It listed buyers, shipments, and bribes paid in gold coin and flesh. They sent it all to El Paso, addressed to Judge Cecil Markham, a federal magistrate with a reputation for hating slavers more than he loved whiskey, and that was saying something. Weeks passed. Then came the telegram. Calderon indicted on multiple counts. Warrants issued. Raid on estates imminent. Marigold Vane. Not a fugitive, she is a witness. Protect her. The bounty hunter never came back. But the truth did. They learned Calderon's empire stretched from Veracruz to Vicksburg. Over 20 plantations, 10 river barges, and half the brothels in San Antonio, all built on stolen bodies. Marigold had not just escaped. She'd exposed an empire. Still, the past wasn't so easily buried. One night, Ephraim found her in the barn, sitting on a crate, turning that old black ledger over in her hands like it might bite. He sat beside her. "I should feel something," she said. "Relief, justice, maybe pride." She looked down, but mostly, "I feel tired." Ephraim nodded. "Justice don't make you whole, just makes the bleeding stop." She closed the book and handed it to him. "Burn it." He didn't ask why, just took it and tossed it in the stove. They watched the flame consume each page until nothing remained but ash and memory. Later that week, a federal marshal rode in to offer her safe passage east. Protection, a new name, even a house in New Orleans, should she want it. She listened, then shook her head. "I've had enough of cages, even the kind with furniture." The marshal didn't argue, just tipped his hat and rode on. That night, she stood on the porch, looking out across the broken fence line, the half-burned barn, the stubborn stalks of grass pushing through the red dirt. "This place ain't paradise," she said. "No," Ephraim replied, "but it's yours, if you want it." She didn't say yes. She didn't need to. In the days that followed, they rebuilt. Slowly, brick by brick, post by post. The Brown boys came by with timber. Ellie Bell donated seed. Old Maynard fixed the chimney and taught Marigold how to brew real coffee, not the tar she'd been boiling. And Ephraim, he finally planted new wildflowers on the grave where Lenora used to lie, then built a second stone beside it, not for death, but for survival. On the plaque, he etched one word vain. Summer came hard to Two Mule Hollow. The rains didn't show until late June, and when they did, they came fast, turning the red earth to rust-colored soup, flooding the creek beds, and bringing life back to the stubborn mesquite trees. The land, like the people who called it home, had learned to endure. Ephraim healed, slow but steady. The scar along his ribs ached in the morning and burned when he worked too long. But it was a clean wound, earned and worn like a medal he never asked for. Marigold made him drink bitter root tea every night, cursing in French when he tried to skip it. Together, they rebuilt the ranch not just for survival, but with purpose. The fence line stretched farther now, enclosing more than cattle. It enclosed safety, intention. Word spread, quiet and honest, like it always did out west. If you were running from something wicked, if you needed a bed and a meal, and a place where no one asked questions, they'd take you in at Two Mule Hollow. The first to come was a Navajo boy, no more than 12, with whip scars across his back and a voice that came only in whispers. Then a mother and daughter from Del Rio. Then a former Union soldier with burns down his face who couldn't bear the sound of gunfire anymore. Ephraim built extra bunks in the barn. Marigold turned the old smokehouse into a pantry. The place began to feel less like a hiding hole, more like a way station for the broken and brave. One night, the sky was clear enough to see the Milky Way running like spilled silver across the heavens. Ephraim and Marigold sat near the fire pit outside the cabin, coffee in hand, boots off, dogs asleep at their feet. They didn't talk much anymore, not because they had nothing to say, but because they'd learned to say things without words. The fire crackled. Marigold reached out, and he met her halfway. Their hands joined, scarred, calloused, but steady. "I've been thinking," she said, eyes on the flames, "about building a place, just a small house." He glanced over, quiet. "Not because I need to be apart," she added, "but because I want to choose when I come close. Not because I'm kept, or owed, or expected." Ephraim nodded. "That makes sense." She looked at him. "You ain't angry?" "No," he said. "I'd be proud to help you build it." She smiled just a flicker. Gone before it bloomed. But it was real. Some folks thought love was about ownership, control, rings and vows and names scratched into ledgers. But out here, love was simpler, harder. It meant not standing in each other's way. It meant surviving beside someone without smothering what made them fight in the first place. A week later, they loaded up the horses with supplies. They'd heard about a family of Apache hiding out in Whippoorwill Gulch refugees from a cavalry sweep gone wrong, hungry and sick, living rough in the canyons. Marigold had packed bandages and beans. Ephraim carried spare rifles and a water barrel. They didn't talk about what they were riding into, just that it needed doing. At dawn, they saddled up. Marigold rode ahead on her buckskin mare, hair braided back, wide brim hat low over her brow. Ephraim followed on his bay, saddle creaking in rhythm with his old bones. Behind them, the ranch shimmered under golden light. Smoke from the chimney curled like a ribbon into the blue sky. A new flag fluttered on the gate, not of any nation, but hand-stitched by one of the children they'd taken in. It bore a symbol, a broken chain inside a circle of stars. At the edge of the property, Ephraim pulled his horse alongside Marigold's. "You ready?" he asked. She looked toward the hills, where the trees began to rise, tall and ancient, holding stories older than either of them could name. "I've always been ready," she said. Then they rode, two figures against the rising sun, headed into the wild, not to escape, but to answer. To show the world, one canyon at a time, that survival wasn't enough. You had to build something better with what survived. And in the distance, the wind carried a sound not of warning, but of welcome. If you figure the West ain't just cattle drives and saloon brawls, but long roads that lead to second chances, to folks finding their place beneath wide skies and even wider hearts, then you're in the right saddle, friend. Here at the Wild West Stories, we don't just tell tales of gunsmoke and grit. We whisper the ones about family, redemption, and the quiet courage to start again. So if Marigold and Ephraim's ride into Whippoorwill Gulch stirred something in your chest, maybe a memory, maybe a hope, then you already know. Another story's stirring out yonder. So stay close to the fire. I'll be here, waiting.